Imagine a world where a simple shift in the cut of a sleeve or the height of a heel didn't just signal a change in style, but served as a silent, visible countdown to war, revolution, or the complete collapse of an empire. Clothing has never been just clothes, it has always been the skin of history itself. In the stifling heat of 18th century Versailles, the French aristocracy was locked in a deadly game of silhouette. To be seen was to exist, and to be fashionable was to hold power. The grand habit, a stiff, brocaded gown with a corset so rigid it functioned like a cage, was not merely a dress, it was a political statement. It screamed stability, tradition, and the absolute dominance of the monarchy. But in the drafty, dimly lit salons of Paris, a quiet rebellion was brewing. Marie Antoinette, in her desperate, naive attempt to escape the crushing weight of court life, retreated to her private estate, the Petit Trianon. There she did the unthinkable. She abandoned the heavy silk brocades and rigid whalebone corsets for a gauze, a simple, white, lightweight muslin gown. To the Queen, it was comfort. To the public, it was an act of treason. When the portrait of the Queen wearing this peasant-like attire was unveiled, the French public was scandalized. "She is wearing her underwear," the critics whispered. But beneath the scandal was a shift that signaled the end of an era. The sheer simplicity of the muslin dress stripped away the artifice of the monarchy. If the Queen looked like a common woman, then the divine right of kings was no longer divine. The gauze didn't just define the end of the Ancien regime, it practically invited the guillotine to the front door. The revolution that followed wasn't just fought with muskets, it was fought with the rejection of the silk-clad privilege that had suffocated France for centuries. Fast forward to the roaring 1920s in the United States. The carnage of the Great War had ended, and the world was exhausted by trauma. The Victorian and Edwardian ideal of the hourglass figure, achieved through aggressive corsetry that literally displaced internal organs, vanished overnight. In its place rose the flapper. The drop-waist, straight-cut shift dress was more than a fashion trend, it was a physical manifestation of liberation. Women had spent the war years working in factories, driving ambulances, and running households while men were in the trenches. They had tasted independence, and they refused to be squeezed back into the hourglass. The short bob haircut, the flattened chest, and the knee-length hemline were defiant middle fingers to the patriarchy. By shedding the weight of the floor-length petticoats, women were literally moving faster, dancing harder, and occupying more space in the public sphere. When a woman wore a flapper dress in 1925, she was stating that her body belonged to herself, not to the rigid moral codes of her mother's generation. But trends are not always about liberation. Sometimes, they are about the projection of terrifying power. Consider the Zoot Suit riots of 1943 in Los Angeles. During wartime rationing, fabric was a precious commodity. The U.S. government mandated that clothing should be skimpy to conserve wool and silk for the war effort. Yet, young Mexican-American, African-American, and Filipino-American men began wearing zoot suits, outfits defined by an excess of fabric. High-waisted, wide-legged, tight-cuffed trousers, and a long coat with exaggerated shoulder pads. To the mainstream American public, the zoot suit was an act of flagrant, unpatriotic waste. It was seen as a defiance of wartime duty. But for the men wearing them, the suit was a suit of armor against a society that refused to see them as citizens. By wearing clothes that consumed too much fabric, they were claiming a status that the government tried to deny them. The riots that erupted were not just about race. They were about the radical power of clothing to define who is allowed to take up space. The government's attempt to police the fabric of the suit was, in reality, an attempt to police the identity of the minority groups who dared to wear it. Then came the 1960s, a decade where the fabric of society seemed to tear at the seams. The emergence of the miniskirt, championed by Marie Antoinette in London and popularized globally, was the ultimate space-age trend. It was youthful, synthetic, and unapologetically bold. In the shadow of the nuclear threat and the Cold War, the miniskirt was a signal of a generational break. If the 50s were about the conformity of the nuclear family and the new look, the 60s were about the destruction of the status quo. The shift from the structured, tailored suits of the early 60s to the psychedelic, flowing, and often messy aesthetic of the late 60s mirrored the chaos of the Vietnam War and the rise of the counterculture. Clothing became a medium for protest. Military surplus jackets were worn by hippies not because they were fashionable, but because they were an ironic reclamation of the tools of war. To walk down a street in 1968 wearing a military parka covered in peace symbols was to hold a mirror up to the hypocrisy of the state. The story continues into the 1980s, where the power suit became the uniform of a new economic era. With shoulder pads that could rival a linebacker's, the power suit was designed to make women look broader, stronger, and more imposing in the male-dominated boardroom. It was an aesthetic of accumulation, mirroring the excess of Reaganomics and the birth of Wall Street's "greed is good" philosophy. The clothes didn't just define the era, they facilitated the entry of women into spaces that had historically excluded them, using the visual language of masculine authority to claim professional dominance. Today, we stand in the era of fast fashion and the digital algorithm, where trends evaporate as quickly as they appear. But even now, we are defined by what we wear. From the rise of athleisure, a response to a global workforce that no longer desires to be confined to stiff office attire, to the resurgence of vintage, which acts as a nostalgic anchor in a world that feels increasingly unmoored, our clothing remains a roadmap of our anxieties, our aspirations, and our politics. Clothing is the language we speak before we even open our mouths. Every time we choose a garment, we are making a choice about how we want to be perceived and how we want to interact with the power structures of our time. It is a constant, shifting dialogue between the individual and the state, the tradition and the revolution, the past and the future. History isn't just written in books. It is worn on our bodies, stitched into every fiber, and dyed in the colors of our changing world. As long as humanity exists, we will continue to dress, and in doing so, we will continue to document our own existence, one trend at a time. The story of our clothes doesn't end with the boardroom suits of the 80s or the digital trends of today. To truly understand how fashion dictates the heartbeat of civilization, we have to look at the invisible threads that connect the most mundane daily choices to the most radical upheavals of history. The 19th century gave us the crinoline craze, a trend that perfectly encapsulated the dangerous obsession with domesticity. The crinoline, a cage-like structure of steel hoops worn under skirts, expanded the silhouette of women to gargantuan proportions. It was a physical barrier that demanded space, turning a woman into a walking architecture of status. But this was more than a vanity project. It was a lethal irony. Thousands of women died because their crinolines caught fire in fireplaces or became entangled in carriage wheels. They were literally imprisoned by the very symbol of their grace. The struggle to move in those cages was the literal struggle for freedom in an age that expected women to be ornamental, stationary, and silent. When the cage finally collapsed, it wasn't just a change in taste. It was the beginning of the end for the Victorian ideal of the angel in the house. Then, look at the aftermath of the Great Depression. When the global economy crumbled, fashion didn't just become cheaper. It became a masterclass in psychological resilience. In the 1930s, the Hollywood glamour aesthetic took hold. While families were waiting in breadlines, the silver screen was dominated by bias-cut silk gowns that clung to the body, reflecting light and luxury. This wasn't a disconnect. It was a collective hallucination. People needed to see something that didn't look like poverty. Fashion during the Depression became a form of aspirational escapism. It proved that in the face of absolute material collapse, human beings will use style to curate a reality that is more bearable than the one they are living in. Shift the lens to the late 1970s and early 80s, and you find the rise of punk. It was the ultimate visual negation of the status quo. Where previous generations had used clothes to fit into a hierarchy, the punks used them to destroy the concept of hierarchy entirely. Safety pins, ripped shirts, and bondage straps were not just edgy. They were a surgical strike against the consumerist narrative. By taking the symbols of domestic order, the safety pin, the household garment, and subverting them into weapons of aesthetic rebellion, they made the political point that if society was broken, then their clothes should look broken too. It was the birth of do-it-yourself culture, a loud rejection of the mass-produced identity that the late capitalist machine tried to impose on everyone. We also have to consider the uniforms of the future, the space-age fashion of the mid-20th century. During the space race, designers like André Correges and Pierre Cardin were obsessed with vinyl, plastic, and metallic fabrics. They were dressing humanity for a future that hadn't happened yet. They wanted us to look like we belonged on a lunar colony, not a dusty 1950s living room. This wasn't just about cool looks. It was about the optimism of a species that believed technology would solve its problems. The stiff, plasticized aesthetics of that time were a testament to the era's absolute, unwavering belief in progress. When that optimism hit the wall of environmental reality and economic stagnation, the fashion shifted again, turning toward the earthy, organic, and often depressive tones of the 70s. The clothes tracked our collective loss of faith in the future we had been promised. Even the humble denim jean tells a story of subversion. Originally the rugged, indigo-dyed uniform of the working class, miners, laborers, and cowboys, it was the epitome of function over form. But when it migrated from the factory to the suburban schoolyard in the 1950s, it became the uniform of the rebel without a cause. It was a way for the post-war youth to distance themselves from their suit and tie fathers. Eventually, it was co-opted by the fashion industry, washed, ripped, and sold at a premium, proving the ultimate cycle of American culture. We take the tools of the working man, turn them into a symbol of rebellion, and then package them as a mass-market commodity. Today, we see the rise of gorpcore, the trend of wearing high-end, high-performance hiking gear in urban settings. Why are people wearing $1,000 waterproof parkas and hiking boots to sit in a coffee shop in Brooklyn? It's a reflection of our profound modern anxiety. We are living in a time of climate instability, global uncertainty, and the digital isolation of the screen. Gorpcore is the fashion of preparedness. It is the aesthetic of being ready for the apocalypse. Or at least ready to abandon the city the moment it becomes uninhabitable. We are dressing for a crisis that is always just around the corner. Every hemline, every fabric choice, every accessory is a marker on the map of human behavior. When we look back at the portraits of the past, we aren't just looking at silhouettes. We are looking at the fears, the riots, the hopes, and the radical shifts of the people who wore them. We are always telling the world who we are, where we've been, and what we are terrified of losing. We are walking history books, and our clothes are the chapters we write every single morning. The next time you put on a pair of jeans, a blazer, or a simple hoodie, remember, you aren't just getting dressed. You are participating in a conversation that has been going on for centuries, and you are adding your own small, defiant mark to the history of the world. The evolution of style is often misread as a superficial cycle of what's in and what's out, but to look closer is to realize that fashion is the physical manifestation of our collective psychology. We don't just wear clothes, we wear the zeitgeist. Consider the suit itself, that ubiquitous uniform of modern business. For centuries, the masculine silhouette was defined by flamboyant color, lace, and velvet, signaling nobility and inherited wealth. But in the early 19th century, during a shift known as the Great Male Renunciation, men's fashion took a radical, dark turn. Beau Brummel, the arbiter of taste in Regency London, stripped away the ruffles and the bright hues in favor of the dark, perfectly tailored coat and pantaloons. It was a move toward the rational, the serious, and the professional. This was the birth of the citizen subject. As the Industrial Revolution shifted power from the landed gentry to the merchant class, the suit became the uniform of the new world, a look that whispered, "I am efficient, I am reliable, and I am here to work." It was the visual language of the capitalist era, and it has remained remarkably static for 200 years because it represents the fundamental structure of our modern economy. Then, contrast that rigid uniformity with the sapeurs of the Congo or the dandies of Harlem in the 1920s. These subcultures didn't just wear clothes, they performed defiance. In environments where systemic oppression tried to strip them of agency and identity, they adopted the most extravagant, colorful, and meticulously tailored versions of high-fashion suits. This wasn't about assimilating into the power structure, it was about outdressing it. By taking the symbols of Western wealth and exaggerating them to a level of artistry that the original designers never intended, they reclaimed power. It was a visual reminder that dignity is not a gift from society, it is an assertion of the individual. We also see this narrative in the New Look of 1947, introduced by Christian Dior. After the trauma and scarcity of World War II, the world was hungry for a return to beauty and excess. The New Look featured rounded shoulders, cinched waists, and massive, flowing skirts that used yards and yards of fabric. It was a violent reaction to the austerity of the war years. But it was also a regressive political statement. By forcing women back into corsets and heavy, restrictive layers, the fashion industry was signaling a return to the traditional gender roles that had been disrupted by the war. Fashion, in this moment, was used as a tool to put the genie of female independence back into the bottle. It was a beautiful dress, but it was also a cage. Look further at the bodycon craze of the 1990s and 2000s. The invention and mass adoption of synthetic, stretchable fabrics like lycra and spandex changed the way we perceived the human form. For the first time in history, clothing didn't just drape over the body, it clung to it like a second skin. This coincided with the digital revolution, the beginning of our obsession with the curated self. As we entered the age of social media, our clothes began to serve a dual purpose. They had to look good in person, but more importantly, they had to look good in a photograph. The rise of Instagram-ready fashion, characterized by bold logos, saturated colors, and figure-hugging silhouettes, was the first time in human history that a massive trend was dictated by how it appeared on a small, glowing screen rather than in the tactile world of human interaction. Even the phenomenon of Normcore in the 2010s was a fascinating cultural symptom. As the world became increasingly polarized and chaotic, a trend emerged that championed the unremarkable. People began wearing plain white sneakers, gray hoodies, and nondescript dad jeans. It was a rejection of the high fashion cycle entirely. It was a visual plea for normalcy, a way of saying, "The world is too loud, the trends are too fast, and I am opting out." It was the fashion of anonymity in an age where the internet made everyone a public figure. And what of the future? We are currently seeing the rise of digital fashion, garments that exist only in code, meant to be worn by avatars in the metaverse or layered over photos via augmented reality. This is the ultimate detachment of clothing from function. We are moving toward a world where what we wear is entirely about the brand, the status, and the visual representation, without the need for warmth, protection, or even physical existence. We are evolving from a species that uses clothing as a tool for survival to one that uses it as a purely symbolic layer of information. The thread that ties all of these eras together is our constant, restless need to define ourselves against the backdrop of our environment. Whether it is the corset of the 18th century, the flapper dress of the 20s, or the virtual skin of the future, clothing remains our primary interface with the world. We build our identities in the dressing room, and we wear our history on our sleeves, literally. Every time you zip up a jacket or lace up a shoe, you are making a choice that echoes through the halls of your own personal narrative, and by extension, the broader story of humanity. We are the authors of our own history, and the garment is the pen. The deeper we dig, the more we realize that the history of fashion is essentially the history of the human body as a battlefield. It is the story of where we have been allowed to go, what we have been forced to do, and how we have chosen to rebel. Consider the bloomer craze of the 1850s. a moment often treated as a humorous footnote in history books, but which was actually a radical act of insurrection. Elizabeth Smith Miller and later Amelia Bloomer dared to suggest that women wear loose trousers gathered at the ankle under a shortened skirt. This was not just a design choice. It was a threat to the foundation of Victorian gender norms. The public outcry was hysterical, not because the outfit was ugly, but because it made women mobile. It allowed them to walk, run, and cycle without the dangerous, restrictive weight of floor-length skirts. To the conservative establishment, a woman in trousers was a woman who could leave the domestic sphere, and that was a revolutionary act that they fought with every ounce of social shaming they possessed. The Bloomers were defeated, but the seed of movement, physical and political, had been planted. Then, jump to the era of the mod movement in the mid-1960s. This was the first time in history that youth became a recognized economic and political power bloc. Before this, teenagers were expected to dress like miniature versions of their parents. But the mods, with their sharp-cut Italian suits, vibrant geometric patterns, and go-go boots, invented a new language. They were obsessed with cool, a currency that was entirely divorced from inherited wealth or adult approval. By embracing the mass-produced, the synthetic, and the pop art aesthetic, they were rejecting the post-war stuffiness of their fathers. They turned the city streets into a runway, and for the first time, the runway started looking to the streets for its inspiration. We must also look at the grunge aesthetic of the early 90s, which served as a visceral, flannel-wrapped critique of the excess of the 80s. While the previous decade was defined by gold-plated vanity and the power suit, grunge was the antithesis. It was thrifted, oversized, moth-eaten, and deeply cynical. It wasn't about looking rich. It was about wearing the aesthetic of the discarded. By dressing in layers of flannel and heavy boots. The youth of the 90s were signaling a rejection of the corporate ladder and the American dream that had begun to feel like a hollow promise. It was the visual equivalent of an exit strategy from the consumerist cult. And consider the evolution of the hoodie, perhaps the most controversial garment of the 21st century. Originally designed for warmth and utility for athletes and laborers, it morphed into the uniform of the outsider, the rebel, and the artist. Yet, it also became a focal point of systemic tension. In many contexts, the act of putting up a hood is seen as a gesture of concealment, making it a lightning rod for debates about surveillance, racial profiling, and public safety. The hoodie has become a powerful paradox. It is the ultimate expression of individual comfort and autonomy, yet it is also a garment that can make the wearer a target of state and social scrutiny. It proves that a piece of fabric is never neutral. Its meaning is entirely dependent on who is wearing it and where they are standing. Look at the modern rise of gender-neutral, or unisex, clothing. This isn't just a trend, it is the final frontier in the dismantling of the Victorian sartorial binary. For 2 centuries, we have insisted that men's clothing should be based on angularity and utility, while women's should be based on curvature and decoration. The move toward fluidity, draping, oversized cuts, and the shedding of gender tailoring is a direct challenge to the idea that clothing should signal a person's biological role in society. It is the aesthetic of a world that is moving toward the recognition of the individual beyond the labels of he or she. We are now entering an era where our clothing is increasingly becoming smart. We are seeing the integration of wearable tech, fabrics that monitor our health, regulate our temperature, and project our data. We are moving from fashion to functionality. But even as we add sensors and processors to our clothes, the core human desire remains the same. We want to control the narrative of who we are. As we look back at the centuries of corsets, uniforms, rags, and digital skins, we see a singular, undeniable truth. We are never just wearing clothes. We are wearing our sociology. We are wearing our economics. We are wearing our fears of being ignored and our desire to be seen. Every seam is a border, every button is a choice, and every fabric is a statement. The history of fashion is the history of human agency. Whether we are stitching fabric by candlelight or coding avatars in the cloud, we are doing exactly what we have always done, using the tools at our disposal to tell the world that we are here, we are changing, and we are not going to be defined by anyone other than ourselves. The cycle continues, and the next chapter is currently being stitched into the fabric of your daily life. The story of humanity is often told through the lens of wars, treaties, and political speeches, but if you look at the evidence left behind, the textiles, the dyes, the cut of a hem, you realize that history isn't just documented by historians. It is lived, performed, and protested in the very fabric we drape over our bodies. Consider the sartorial silence of the post-revolutionary periods. Whenever a regime falls, the first thing to vanish is the visual language of the old guard. Following the French Revolution, the extravagant wigs and silk stockings of the aristocracy were replaced by the sans-culottes, literally, those without knee breeches. By wearing long trousers instead of the fashionable, status-laden breeches of the nobility, the common people were physically erasing the physical markers of the class system. They were dressing for a republic, even before the laws had fully codified it. It was a visual coup d'etat. Then, witness the transformation during the Industrial Revolution. Before factories, clothing was slow, personal, and expensive. Most people owned 1 or 2 sets of clothes that were mended until they were unrecognizable. The introduction of the sewing machine and mass-produced textiles didn't just change the economy. It changed the human relationship with identity. For the first time, you didn't have to be born into a rank to look the part. A merchant could dress like a gentleman. A factory worker could mimic the style of a clerk. Fashion became the first true democratic experiment, though it also birthed the modern anxiety of keeping up with the Joneses. We traded the stability of static class identity for the restless, never-ending climb of social status. We see this same tension in the rise of the yellow press and the birth of celebrity fashion in the early 20th century. When photography became portable and the printing press could mass distribute images of movie stars, the concept of a trend was born. For the first time, a person in a small town in Kansas could copy the exact hat worn by a starlet in Hollywood. This was the beginning of the global style hive mind. We stopped dressing for our village and started dressing for the camera. We became, effectively, the directors of our own personal public relations campaigns. Think, too, about the uniforms of resistance during the civil rights movement in the United States. While protesters could have worn anything, they chose to dress in their Sunday best. They wore crisp shirts, ties, and modest dresses. This was a calculated, brilliant use of clothing as a rhetorical tool. By dressing with the utmost formality and dignity, they made it impossible for the media to portray them as anything other than respectable, tax-paying, orderly citizens. They used the white establishment's own sartorial codes against it, exposing the brutality of those who would assault a man in a tie and a woman in a Sunday dress. The clothing was a shield. It commanded a level of respect that their words alone were being denied. And look at the current age of hypervisibility. We live in an era where our clothing is tracked by data. Fashion brands now use algorithms to predict what we want to wear before we even know we want it. We are being nudged into trends by digital echoes. Yet, we are also seeing a massive pushback in the form of circular fashion, the drive toward thrifting, upcycling, and slow fashion. This is a rejection of the algorithmic life. It is an attempt to reclaim the soul of the garment. When you choose to wear a vintage jacket, you are choosing to participate in a history that has already been lived, rather than buying into the hollow, temporary promise of a new drop. As we look toward the future, we find ourselves at a strange crossroads. We are oscillating between the physical world, where clothes protect us, keep us warm, and mark our presence, and the virtual world, where our identity is defined by this skin we choose for our digital avatars. We are becoming more fluid in our expression, shedding the rigid categories of the past, yet we are also more subject to the pressures of global fashion conglomerates than ever before. The clothes you are wearing right now are not an accident. They are the result of thousands of years of evolution, revolutions, riots, economic shifts, and personal choices. You are wearing the legacy of the people who fought for the right to move, the right to work, and the right to define their own image. Every time you step out the door, you are continuing this massive, global, centuries-long project of human self-definition. The fashion cycle isn't just about hemlines going up or down. It's about the human spirit constantly testing the boundaries of its environment. We are the masters of our own silhouette, and as long as we have the capacity to choose what we put on our bodies, we will always have the power to define who we are. The story hasn't finished yet. You are currently writing the next page. The history of clothing is not just a study of aesthetics. It is an archaeology of human ambition. Every time we alter a silhouette, we are shifting the boundaries of what is socially permissible and physically possible. Consider the suit of armor as the precursor to modern high-end tailoring. In the medieval era, a suit of armor was the most expensive, technically sophisticated, and status-defining object a man could own. It was a masterpiece of engineering that had to fit the wearer with absolute precision. When the era of plate armor ended, that obsession with structure, rigidity, and perfect fit didn't disappear, it migrated into the men's suit. The shoulder pads, the stiffened lapels, and the structured chest of a modern blazer are direct descendants of the breastplate. When a CEO wears a suit to a boardroom, they are unconsciously invoking the visual language of the knight. It is a costume of protection and command, inherited from a time when the wrong fit could mean the difference between life and death. Then, witness the radical disruption of denim during the mid-20th century. Denim began its life as blue denim, a rugged, utilitarian fabric for laborers. By the 1950s, it underwent a seismic shift in meaning. When actors like Marlon Brando and James Dean appeared on screen in jeans, they weren't just showing off a casual look, they were performing a calculated, dangerous rejection of the adult, professional world. For the first time, the working class uniform was rebranded as the rebel uniform. The establishment banned jeans in schools and restaurants, which, of course, only cemented their status as the ultimate tool of youth rebellion. It was the moment that authenticity became the most valuable currency in fashion. We stopped wanting to look like we were arriving, and started wanting to look like we were capable. We must also acknowledge the invisible architecture of undergarments. The history of the corset, the bustle, and the crinoline is often reduced to a story of vanity, but it was actually a story of control. For centuries, the body was treated as something that needed to be sculpted, braced, and managed to align with a rigid societal ideal. The eventual rejection of these structures, the liberation of the torso, wasn't just a change in comfort. It was a shift in the perceived autonomy of the human form. When women stopped wearing the cage, they began claiming the right to move, breathe, and occupy space on their own terms. It was the physical prerequisite for the feminist movements that would follow. Look at the athleisure revolution we are living through right now. It is the first time in human history that our performance clothing has become our everyday clothing. We are now dressed for a life of perpetual motion. We wear leggings, sneakers, and technical fabrics to meetings, to dinner, and to our living rooms. This is not just a trend, it is a psychological adaptation to a world that feels increasingly fast-paced, unpredictable, and insecure. We are dressing to be ready for anything, to run, to travel, to adapt. It is the aesthetic of the nomadic lifestyle that the digital age has forced upon us. And what of sustainable fashion? We are currently witnessing a massive ideological war within the closet. We are moving from the era of disposable to the era of traceable. The consumer is beginning to demand to know the origin of the fiber, the ethics of the dye, and the footprint of the supply chain. This is the first time in history that the morality of the garment is becoming as important as the look of the garment. It is the beginning of a transparent era, where what you wear will soon be accompanied by a digital history of its own. As we stand here in 2026, we are at an incredible vantage point. We are the inheritors of every rebellion, every industrial breakthrough, and every stylistic shift that has come before. We are wearing the technology of the future, the aesthetics of the past, and the politics of the present. The story of clothing is the story of our survival. It is the narrative of how we turn mud, plants, and synthetic fibers into the outward expression of our inner selves. We have evolved from wearing animal skins to survive the elements to wearing high-tech polymers to survive the culture. And the most beautiful part of this history? The pen is in your hand. Every time you choose what to wear today, you are not just getting dressed, you are casting a vote for the person you want to be in a world that is constantly asking you to define yourself. The evolution is ongoing, the threads are being woven, and the next trend is whatever you decide it will be. The trajectory of human style is essentially the story of our friction with authority. Every era has a correct way to be seen, and every generation eventually uses its clothing as a weapon to dismantle those expectations. Consider the haute couture explosion of the mid-20th century. After the collective trauma of 2 world wars, fashion houses became the new cathedrals. Designers like Balenciaga and Dior were not just making dresses, they were constructing monuments to order, symmetry, and perfection. They were trying to convince a fractured world that beauty still existed and that it could be controlled. But this obsession with perfection was destined to be shattered. The very precision of those gowns became the target for the next generation. The late 60s and 70s saw a total rejection of the couture standard, moving toward the raw, the unrefined, and the handmade. It was a mass migration from the showroom to the street, proving that when society demands perfection, the human spirit will eventually demand the right to be messy. Look at the evolution of the t-shirt. It began as a literal piece of underwear, a plain, cotton garment meant to be hidden beneath a shirt. Yet, through the mid-20th century, it was promoted to the status of a primary garment. It is now the most democratic piece of clothing ever invented. It is a canvas for political slogans, band logos, personal statements, and corporate branding. The t-shirt is the modern equivalent of the revolutionary pamphlet. By printing a message on our chest, we have turned ourselves into walking billboards for our beliefs. It is the ultimate fusion of the private self and the public manifesto. We also see the cyclical nature of utility. During times of extreme economic hardship, such as the Great Depression, fashion turned toward make do and mend. People took flour sacks and transformed them into dresses. Today, we call this upcycling, and it is touted as a modern, high-fashion innovation. But it's the same impulse, the human instinct to take what is available and infuse it with dignity. When the system fails to provide, we define our own survival through our aesthetic. We take the discarded and make it desirable, proving that style is not about the price tag, but about the alchemy of transforming the common into the unique. Consider the role of subcultures in the digital age. In the past, trends moved from the runway to the street. Now, they move from the depths of the internet to the runway. We have seen the birth of aesthetic tribes, goth, cottagecore, cyber Y2K, minimalist, each one a hyper-specific identity constructed to find community in a lonely, digital world. We are dressing to find our people in a sea of billions. Fashion has become the most effective way to signal our values, our music taste, and our political leanings without having to say a single word. It is a visual language that transcends borders and languages, allowing for a form of global belonging that we have never experienced before. And what about the future of materiality? We are on the precipice of a revolution in biotechnology. We are beginning to see lab-grown leather, fabrics woven from spider silk, and clothes that change color based on our mood or environment. We are no longer just tailoring fabric, we are engineering it. This changes the very definition of garment. It is no longer just a layer of protection, it is an extension of our biology. We are becoming cyborgs of style, where the line between the clothes we wear and the body we inhabit is blurring. As we look back at the grand sweep of this history, from the rigid corsets of the past to the smart textiles of the future, we realize that clothing is the ultimate diary of our species. We have used fashion to declare our independence, to display our wealth, to mourn our losses, and to dream of our futures. We are not just dressing for the weather or the social occasion. We are dressing for the world we want to live in. Every morning, when you reach into your closet, you are touching the ghosts of every revolutionary, rebel, designer, and dreamer who came before you. You are choosing which part of that history you want to carry forward today. You are a curator of your own legacy, and your outfit is the story you tell the world about who you are. The history of fashion is not in the books, it is in your closet, waiting for you to make the next move. The cycle doesn't stop, the fabric doesn't settle, and the narrative is yours to continue. How will you tell your part of the story today? The history of clothing is, at its core, the history of human survival masked as art. We started by wrapping ourselves in animal skins to endure the Ice Age, but we quickly realized that those skins could also communicate our status, our tribe, and our intent. Every stitch in the fabric of human history has been a calculated decision to either blend in or stand out. Look at the Great Peacock Revolution of the late 1960s. For nearly 2 centuries, men's fashion had been trapped in the dark, somber, and rigid codes of the Great Male Renunciation. It was a world of grays, navies, and blacks, the colors of industrial efficiency. But suddenly the tide turned. Men began wearing velvet paisley, bold patterns, and ruffles. This was a direct, visual assault on the buttoned-up, soul-crushing conformity of the post-war corporate machine. By wearing frivolous clothing, men were reclaiming a sense of playfulness and individuality that had been systematically stripped away by the demands of the office. It was a sartorial protest that proved the desire for self-expression is stronger than any corporate dress code. Then, there is the quiet, lethal power of uniformity. Throughout history, the moment a group gains true power, they adopt a uniform. Think of the Mao suit in mid-20th century China or the crisp, white button-down and blue blazer of the American elite. A uniform signals that the individual has been subsumed by the collective power of the group. It is a way of saying, I do not need to stand out because I am part of something larger. Paradoxically, when the counterculture adopts a uniform, like the black leather jackets of the 50s rockers or the ripped denim of the punks, they are doing the exact same thing. They are signaling loyalty to a tribe that is separate from the mainstream. We never truly escape the need for a uniform. We only choose which power structure we want to serve. Consider the globalized wardrobe of the 21st century. We are living in a moment where a teenager in Tokyo, a banker in London, and a coder in San Francisco might all be wearing the exact same brand of sneaker. We have achieved a level of sartorial homogenization that is unprecedented. But look closely, and you will see the cracks in this uniformity. We are currently seeing a massive resurgence in localism, a push toward regional textiles, traditional craftsmanship, and unique, small-batch manufacturing. This is a reaction to the soulless, mass-produced digital reality. We are trying to find ourselves again by reconnecting with the tactile, the local, and the authentic. We also have to confront the environmental cost of our vanity. For the first time, our clothing choices have a direct, measurable impact on the health of the planet. Fast fashion, with its rapid cycles and disposable nature, has turned our closets into contributors to the global climate crisis. This has led to a fascinating new trend, the ethics of the archive. People are increasingly valuing pieces that have a story, clothes that have been mended, traded, and passed down. We are moving away from the new and toward the meaningful. We are realizing that the most radical thing you can do for the planet is to stop consuming and start cherishing what you already own. As we look toward the horizon, we can see the rise of post-physical fashion. In the metaverse, we are dressing our digital selves in garments that defy the laws of physics. We wear light, we wear data, we wear shifting patterns that change every time we blink. This is the ultimate expression of the human desire to define ourselves without the constraints of our biological bodies. In the digital realm, you are not defined by your shape, your size, or your age, you are defined by your aesthetic. The story of the garment is the story of us. It is a record of our rebellion against the cold, our triumph over the elements, and our endless, desperate need to be recognized as individuals in a vast, uncaring universe. We are the only species that designs our own identity, and we do it through the layers we place between ourselves and the world. Every thread in the history of fashion is a choice. You are currently wearing the results of that history, but you are also dictating the next development. The fabric of the future is being woven in the choices you make every single day. Whether you are thrifting for a vintage find, investing in a piece of sustainable tech, or simply dressing for the person you want to be tomorrow, you are participating in the longest, most vibrant conversation in human history. The clothes change, the materials evolve, but the motivation remains the same. We dress to announce that we are here, we are changing, and we are the authors of our own story. The next page is blank. What will you wear to write it? The history of our attire is a chronicle of our survival, our status, and our defiance. To track the evolution of a sleeve or the height of a heel is to track the tectonic shifts in human civilization itself. We have navigated the transition from the functional skin of our ancestors to the symbolic, high-tech armor of the modern era, and the journey is far from over. Consider the paradox of luxury. In the early stages of civilization, luxury was defined by material scarcity. The rarest dyes, the most difficult fabrics, the most complex hand sewing. To wear something impossible to replicate was to hold power. But in our modern era, we have inverted this. Luxury has shifted toward the logo, a semiotic symbol that carries a psychological weight far beyond the quality of the material itself. We have entered the age of signifier fashion, where the value of a garment is determined not by how it protects the body, but by how it signals belonging to an exclusive digital or social tribe. It is a transition from the tangible to the abstract. Look at the rise of the streetwear hegemony. Over the last decade, we have watched as the aesthetics of the skate park and the basketball court conquered the halls of high-end fashion houses. For centuries, the runway dictated the street. Now, the street dictates the runway. This is a profound democratization of power. It suggests that the culture of the common, the casual, and the athletic is more influential than the tradition of the elite. When a billionaire wears a high-end, limited edition hoodie, they are participating in the visual language of the youth, acknowledging that the future of status is not found in a tuxedo, but in the aesthetic of the active, the mobile, and the youthful. Think about the psychology of the pocket. It seems like a minor detail, but the history of pockets is a history of agency. Throughout the Victorian era, women were denied functional pockets. They were expected to carry their essentials in separate, decorative bags. This was a form of physical dependence, a way of ensuring a woman was always encumbered and unable to move freely without her accessories. The fight for the pocket was a fight for the right to move through the world with one's own tools. Today, the pocket is a given, but it serves as a reminder that every piece of our clothing is designed with an implicit assumption about what we are allowed to do. We are currently witnessing the integration of fashion and data. We are beginning to wear fabrics that communicate with our environments. Imagine a jacket that adjusts its thermal properties based on the weather, or a garment that can interact with your digital devices. We are moving toward augmented identity, where our clothing is a portal. We are no longer just putting on a sweater, we are putting on a layer of information. This changes our relationship with the world from one of observation to one of constant interaction. However, amidst all this progress, we are also feeling the weight of the nostalgic pull. In an age of artificial intelligence and virtual realities, there is a massive cultural craving for the real. We see this in the surge of interest in archival fashion, historical reconstruction, and the slow fashion movement. We are trying to ground ourselves in the tactile history of the past because we feel the digital future pulling us apart. We want clothes that feel like they have a soul, clothes that have been aged by the sun and the wear of human hands. It is a rebellion against the synthetic perfection of the digital age. As we stand in 2026, we realize that clothing is the final frontier of individual expression. In a world of mass production and global algorithms, the act of choosing what to wear is the last truly intimate, personal decision we make every single day. You are the architect of your own silhouette. You are the curator of your own history. The story of the garment is the story of us, a species that refused to just survive the cold, but decided to decorate the journey. From the first bone needles in the prehistoric dark to the smart threads of our digital future, we have used our clothes to scream, "I exist," into the silence of the universe. The clothes change, the trends cycle, and the materials evolve, but the motivation is eternal. Every morning you have a choice. You can dress to fit the mold, or you can dress to break it. You are wearing your own history, and you are writing the next chapter of the human story. What will you choose to wear today? The story of humanity, when stripped of its textbooks and its politics, is a story of what we have chosen to put on our bodies. We are the only creatures on this planet who do not merely adapt to our climate. We curate our appearance to manipulate the perception of our reality. Look at the uniformity of the digital nomad that has swept across the modern world. In a globalized economy, our clothing has become a kind of international passport. The crisp white shirt, the tailored blazer, the minimalist sneaker, these have become the universal signifiers of a mobile, high-functioning professional. It is a language of efficiency. By wearing these clothes, you are signaling that you belong to the global tribe of the connected, the productive, and the standardized. It is a fascinating evolution. We have traded the regional costumes of our ancestors for a global, homogenized aesthetic that says, "I am ready to work anywhere, with anyone at any time." Consider the revolution of the oversized. In a world where our digital lives have become increasingly claustrophobic and surveilled, our physical clothing has moved in the opposite direction. The massive rise of oversized, billowy silhouettes in the last few years is not just a trend. It is a physical expression of a need for autonomy. When we are being tracked by algorithms, our cameras, and our data, we are unconsciously choosing to wear clothing that hides the body, takes up more space, and rejects the hypersexualized, fitted aesthetics of the previous era. We are literally building a fabric wall between ourselves and a world that wants to see through us. Then, witness the return of the heirloom. We are currently in the midst of a massive, quiet protest against the fast fashion machine. People are scouring vintage shops, estate sales, and digital marketplaces not just to save money, but to reclaim the story of an object. To wear a coat that was made in 1970 is to carry a physical piece of that era's energy, its craft, and its durability. We are looking for ghosts in our clothes because we feel the sterility of the modern, mass-manufactured world. It is a profound act of defiance to value a garment because it has survived, rather than because it is new. We must also look at this sartorial anarchy of the internet. For the first time, trends are no longer handed down by a small group of designers in Paris or Milan. They are born in the chaotic, lightning-fast echo chambers of social media. We are seeing the rise of micro-trends, aesthetics that appear, saturate the culture, and die within months. This is the fast food version of fashion. It creates a state of perpetual dissatisfaction. We are constantly consuming to keep up with the algorithm. The danger here is that we are losing our ability to have a personal style. We are becoming curators of other people's ideas, rather than the architects of our own. Yet there is a silver lining. We are also seeing the rise of cyborg craft, the intersection of artisanal skill and high-tech manufacturing. Designers are using 3D printing, biomaterials, and smart weaves to create clothing that is fundamentally different from anything that has come before. We are entering an era where our clothes might monitor our stress levels, change color based on our environment, or even clean the air around us. We are taking the ancient art of the loom and merging it with the intelligence of the computer. As we look at the fabric of our lives, we realize that we are standing at the most critical juncture in the history of attire. We have the power to destroy the planet with our consumption, or we have the power to innovate our way out of it. We have the power to use our clothes as a cage, or as a set of wings. The story of the garment is the story of you. Every day, you wake up and you make a decision that affects the economy, the environment, and your own identity. You are deciding what parts of the past you want to honor, and what parts of the future you want to build. You are wearing your history, your politics, and your hopes. The cloth you are draped in right now is not just a piece of fabric. It is a manifesto. It is a record of a civilization that has fought for the right to dress itself, to define itself, and to look at the world and say, "This is who I am." The cycle of history continues to spin, the loom continues to weave, and the story of humanity is being rewritten in every hem, every button, and every choice. You are not just a spectator in this history, you are the trend, the revolution, and the future. What will you stitch into the world today? The final chapter of our sartorial history isn't written in a boardroom or on a runway. It's being written in the quiet, subconscious decisions you make when you stand before your closet each morning. We have reached the culmination of a thousand-year experiment, the transition from clothing as a necessity for survival to clothing as the ultimate medium for human consciousness. We are currently witnessing the birth of kinetic identity. For the vast majority of human history, clothing was static. It was a snapshot of who you were when you left the house. But as we move toward the integration of smart fabrics and digital overlays, our clothing is becoming dynamic. Soon, the garment will not just exist, it will respond. It will shift in color, opacity, and texture based on your heart rate, your environment, or your digital mood. We are moving toward a future where our clothing is a living, breathing interface, a second skin that doesn't just cover us, but participates in our reality. Consider what this means for the democratization of expression. When the cost of digital fashion drops to near zero, the barriers to entry for style will evaporate. You will no longer need to be wealthy to have a wardrobe that rivals a monarch's. You will simply need the digital file. This creates a fascinating tension. As our digital presence becomes infinite and malleable, our physical presence will likely become even more obsessed with the tactile. We will see a sharp divide between our digital selves, which will be loud, fast, and constantly changing, and our physical selves, which will prioritize high quality, natural, and durable materials. We will crave the weight, the smell, and the texture of wool, linen, and silk precisely because the rest of our world has become so frictionless and weightless. We must also reckon with the legacy of the Anthropocene. The history of fashion has been a history of extraction, taking from the earth to clothe the body. We are now entering an era of regenerative fashion, where the clothes we wear will be grown in labs, woven from fungi, or captured from carbon in the atmosphere. This is the most profound shift in our relationship with the environment since we first picked up a needle. We are moving from being predators of the planet to being partners with it. The suit of the future won't be made at the expense of the environment. It will be a part of the environmental cycle itself. Think of the global citizen of 2026 and beyond. We are no longer bound by the geography of our birth. Our clothing styles have blended into a global synthesis. When you look at the streets of New York, Tokyo, or Lagos, you see the same silhouettes, the same hoodies, the same sneakers, the same denim. We are witnessing the first truly species-wide aesthetic. We have created a visual language that transcends borders. This is a monumental achievement in human connection. We are finding ways to recognize our people through the cut of a coat, regardless of which language they speak or which flag they salute. But as the story concludes, we must remember the constant, the human impulse. Through every shift, the corset, the flapper dress, the zoot suit, the power suit, the hoodie, the driving force has never changed. We are a species that refuses to be defined by our biology. We are the creators of our own image. We dress to signal our bravery, our descent, our belonging, and our uniqueness. When you look in the mirror tomorrow, look past the brand, the size, and the trend. See the thousands of years of evolution that went into the garment you're wearing. You are wearing the culmination of a long, loud, and brilliant struggle for self-definition. You are the current protagonist in a story that began in the caves of the Paleolithic and is currently accelerating into the digital unknown. The story of the garment is the story of us. It is the record of our resilience. It is the monument to our ego. It is the diary of our dreams. The threads have been spun, the fabric has been cut, and the needle is in your hand. You are the architect of your own history. Wear it well,